Hello, hello, hello. This is Gresh from the I Am CEO podcast. I have a very special guest on the show today. I have Tim Ringel. Tim, it's great to have you on the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited.
Yes, I'm excited to have you on as well too. You're doing so many awesome things. And of course, before I jumped into the interview, I want to read a little bit more about Tim so you can hear about some of those awesome things. And Tim is a serial entrepreneur with the passion and drive to push past the status quo. His ambition and desire to make things work the way they're supposed to has led him to the role of global CEO of next generational international advertising group Meet the People. A builder of multiple international agencies, Tim is a seasoned global CEO and executive in the marketing space, having run world-renowned Spring Studios and Reprise Digital, IPG Media Brands Digital Global Agency Network. With experience in Europe, the Middle East, Africa, Asia Pacific, Latin America, and the United States, Tim has operationally managed ad businesses with more than 3,000 staff and 68 offices around the globe. He's been a speaker at 250 plus industry events, including talks at the United Nations, Cannes Lions, Google, Facebook, and he is an active supporter of entrepreneurial associations and charities. And can I just say that Tim is a wealth of knowledge and experience? I think you might have started your first digital agency at the age of 21. I thought I heard in an interview. He's also an
That's right.
investor, is right, venture capitalist for some brands that you might have heard of, like Airbnb, SpaceX, and Spotify. But I think one of the biggest things that really stuck out to me was we always and sometimes forget about the human aspect of business and the human part of business, let alone life. And Tim knows all about that. I'm sure we're going to jump right into that. And one other thing that I read from Tim, this quote in his CEO World Biz was that he talked about how important integration in creating an agency was. And he said we need to get back to valuing people again and injecting a little bit of humanity to the mix. So, Tim, excited to have you on the show. All the awesome things you're doing. Are you ready to speak to the IMCO community?
Absolutely. Very excited, as I said. So, yeah, you actually covered me completely already. So,
there we go. We can leave now, right?
Exactly. That's it.
There we go. So, no, I wanted to rewind the clock a little bit. I know I touched on, you starting that first digital business. So, I wanted to hear a little bit more on what I call your CEO story. We'll let you get started with all the awesome work you're doing.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Yeah, sure. So you're absolutely right. I started my first business actually when I was 20, but it was only really established as an entity when I was 21. And that was while I was in college in Europe and got super bored because I was studying economics and it was just terrible to sit in these tech sessions and learn about corporate structures. It was just not what I was interested in. I was a coder by trade in terms of taught myself. Assembler, C++, BASIC, all the stuff you learned when you were born in the 70s and 80s like me. And I was more interested in building stuff. I was just more interested in building websites and trying stuff out. And even before I established the first business, my business partner and I at the time, we actually tried multiple platform ideas, and they all failed because we didn't know what we were doing. We had no capital, no idea what acquiring users meant, all this kind of stuff. But we ended up establishing the first business with 21. I sold it 12 years later. It was a digital agency that primarily grew on the back of the success of Google. And then later, obviously, Facebook and the other players in the market. After I sold that business, we did a reverse takeover of the business that bought my business during the earnout. And that ended up to be my second business. And I inherited, I would say, leadership control of the business when it was probably 370, 400 people. And after 4 years, it was 1,000 people, all across Europe, Middle East, and Asia. And then I sold my equity in that business and moved over to the United States, here to New York City, where I then joined Interpublic Group of Companies, one of the large holding companies in the advertising world, 10 billion revenue, whatever. And they had one big problem, and that was they didn't have a dedicated digital media agency that could compete with the other large holding companies. And the other holding companies all had like strong plays with thousands of people. IPG didn't really have that. And that was where I came from, right? So they basically asked me if I can build it for them. And that's what I did. I started with probably 800 people that I inherited within the organization. And I left IPG 3 years later. We were 3,000 people. Wow. So I like to build businesses within the advertising agency space. Why? Because it's where my two half of the brains come together. I'm again, in all honesty, I'm a college dropout, right? I never finished college because my business was already, I think, 1 million revenue after 3 years. And I talked to my parents, said like, guys, do you really want me to finish this, or can I do what I really love, right? And I said like, you know what, just do whatever you want. And so I dropped out of college to then really pursue my own business that was in the time in Europe already partially successful. So long story short, I really wanted to bring these different brain halves together. And the agent, so one brain hub is the agency advertising industry. The one thing I had taught myself, because when you're an engineer, you're building platforms and websites, it's not very easy to make money. But the advertising industry, to start an agency, you really just need yourself, a laptop, and time, right? And that was really cheap because I had time, I had a laptop, and I had myself. So it doesn't need any capex. You're not producing anything, but using your brain to make things happen and smarter. And when I started in digital media, you needed a credit card because you needed to buy media, and you could do it with a credit card. So it was very easy to do that. But the other part of my brain is really about building businesses, not related to the advertising industry. But if we're really honest, every company needs the same things. They need good people, they need a smart product or a good product, and they need to sell that product. And once you understand advertising, marketing, digital, traditional media, you kind of can sell any product if you've really understood how the inner workings are. So I got exposed during that journey of building agencies more and more to companies that needed help just to build their business. And this is how I became an active business angel and data venture capital investor, because no matter if you were Spotify, Airbnb, you name it, Lyft, all they needed was users, right? And on the platform. And how do you get that? You acquire it digitally.
Yeah.
So that's where the two halves kind of come together. And when I came to New York, I promised myself after my 3 years in IPG, that was lots of fun, but also very political and not necessarily super entrepreneurial for me as a person. Also because there was obviously no real equity I could own, right? I promised myself I wanted to build another company where these two come together, where the agency experience I have over 5 companies now, plus building 5 companies now, plus the whole venture capital. How do I help a business to be more successful rather than just buying them a billboard or some digital ads? So that's what I do anyways every day. And Meet the People is basically the framework, the infrastructure we are building to do that at scale.
Nice. I absolutely love that. And so I think when I was listening to a lot of what you were saying, it kind of reminded me of just like that E-Myth part where so many times people are really great at the things that they do, but they don't really have that business aspect. And it sounds like you've been able to kind of master that on an entirely different level, being able to scale to such a degree at all the stops along the journey. Do you find like that's a lot of what you've been able to do with Meet the People is not just, of course, be able to build it within that organization, but also create like a framework, a paradigm, whatever it is that other organizations can kind of implement?
Yeah, I think whoever I meet is always this. I ask the same questions. A lot of people end up talking about tactics right away, and or clients send you a specific briefing of like, oh, we want to do this, we want to make this cup really beautiful, and like my question usually is like, why do you want to make this cup beautiful? What's the ambition of your business? Why do you launch the product? What is the revenue associated with it? Are you defending market share? Are you trying to gain market share? Like, what's the ambition for the company? Because then we can decide together how helpful we can be across all our different services within Meet the People, right? Because we can always answer with tactics. We can always tell people, well, your acquisition cost is too high. We can lower your acquisition cost by being smarter how we buy media, or the brand doesn't resonate with your audience. Yeah, that's all great, but let's understand why we want to achieve something, and then we come in and try to figure out what capabilities make the most short-term and long-term impact.
Yeah, that it makes so much sense in being able to kind of execute that and to do that. So I wanted to drill down a little bit more, hear a little bit more, of course, about Meet the People, what you're doing there, how you're creating a, for lack of a better term, better mousetrap that, other organizations can kind of implement.
Yeah. So Meet the People. I think the promise is in the name, right? Already, because when I set it up now 2 years and 3 months ago, I was thinking, how do I going to build a global agency group? And we are acquiring agencies, right? So we have acquired 5 firms. We are going to acquire another firm very soon. We are acquiring them 100%, and we are basically rolling them together, but we keep their DNA their superpower intact and their brand, but we try to collaborate across on clients. So why am I doing that? Number one, usually when someone acquires companies, they take away the brand, they want to make it look like fully integrated and one shop. Agencies are people businesses. It's all relationship. It's all what the individual contributes on a daily basis to the success of the brand they work on. Sure, you can technologize stuff. AI is going to help, tools going to help, machine learning helped a lot in the past 10, 15 years. Nevertheless, there's always a human being who gives the final touch, the final approval, the final kink to the strategy that makes it different to all the other strategies out there. So that's why I felt when I was thinking about setting up a new agency group, I was like, okay, what's going to be the differentiator here? And from my perspective, differentiator is that the people behind the work are not celebrated anymore. Everybody hustles after these shiny objects. That's the latest tech trend and it's going to change the world. And it's all true. Blockchain changes the world. AI is going to change. That's all true, but it's not something we can control, right? So in the meantime, the people who are actually doing the work, until technology is mass implemented and actually is helpful, they're going to get totally ignored, right? So I felt if we create a company where we put these people in the center again, because there are always going to be people in agencies, it's never going to be all technologized and automized and digitalized, right? If we put them front and center, then we have a clear differentiator on the talent side, on the client side, as well as on the product side, right? Because AI is not diverse. Right? AI doesn't have diverse thinking. AI only understands what you feed it. So it can only learn from what you feed it. And getting 10 people around and thinking about why is a brand working or not working, or a product working or not working, you're probably going to get a better outcome than all the desk research anyone else can do with AI, right? So that's my belief. And that's why we started Meet the People. Today we are 550 people, 2 years in, 2 years and 3 months in, with really the ambition to help brands be more successful with their products in market. And that goes from how does my brand look, feel, and taste to how does it feel to take the product out of a shelf somewhere, no matter if digital or physical, and everything in between, from what you see on search, what you see on YouTube, what you see on billboards, what you see when you go to the website, what you see when you touch the app. How do you create customer experiences that are really feel integrated, that really feel like the brand cares, right? And that's really the ambition we are putting out here. And again, my belief is that we're only going to achieve that if we have amazing people. And the only way to have amazing people is to be better to your people. Because happy people create better product creates happier clients create more revenue. That's how it works.
Nice. I absolutely love that, taking care of your people, because your people end up being, your brand. They end up helping, so many other people. And a lot of what I even thought I read, and correct me if I'm wrong, you had this kind of perspective, or kind of I guess a current way that people are running agencies. If they acquire another agency, it's more or less like you said, just saying, okay, we're just going to add on this service offering, we're going to add on that. But it's kind of losing that aspect of kind of understanding how important the people are. And further, that word that kind of came up for me as I was reading a lot about what you do, and your philosophy is around integration, and really what that means and what that looks like. Because I think so many times you're just like, okay, let's just add this page to our website, we provide this additional service, but actually integrating and having them have their own brand, but having that collective mission to kind of help to support the clients is really what you're getting at, if I'm right or wrong.
Right. So integration always sounds scary, right? Because when companies buy each other, integration always means people lose jobs. Because integrations are usually done with an efficiency lens. And of course, like in the end, we're building a company that has to give back value to shareholders. Otherwise, they're not going to invest into a company. That's the reality of capitalism. Nevertheless, you can do things better than others. And that's the whole point, isn't it? So when we talk about integration, like we recently acquired a digital agency in New England. And the first thing we're going to do there is they're going to jump on our HR platform. And that is like a social, think of a social platform where you can see any employee wherever they work in whatever brand of our group. You can look up everything about them, right? They can share content, they can share celebrations. You get all your HR information there as well, your W-2s and your tech stuff. But also you can connect with anyone in the organization, no matter if this person sits in a different brand, no matter if it's me, People can hit me up no matter where they are in the organization, right? They can write a message to me. There's not 15 layers of protecting people from each other. Sometimes that could be helpful. But for me, that from my perspective is integration. If you work as a junior in a company that we end up acquiring, why wouldn't you be allowed to reach out to, the people who are building the organization? Why shouldn't you be allowed to share your opinion about great work that happened within your team, right? So that is besides the parts of where integration is necessary, because another example is financial integration makes a ton of sense, right? If you are a smaller company with 50 people, usually these companies, even if they're profitable, they're not always very cash heavy, right? So if you integrate financials, and financial infrastructure, you can help each other. Oh, we just want a new client and we need to onboard that client. We have to hire against future revenues. How are we going to do that alone? Well, you don't need to worry because we are now a larger group. We can help, right? These things are really, really helpful, I think, also to the companies who join our platform. So integration comes from if we have an integrated mindset on how to solve a business problem for our clients, we bring these different companies and superpowers together, and we're doing that for a few brands already very successfully. At the same time, integration means how can we get people closer to each other and ideally allow them to celebrate great work? Because the worst feeling is you work in an organization with thousands of people, you do an amazing job, your manager knows all about it, but nobody else, right? And that is super frustrating if the CEO posts something on LinkedIn like how great we won this, I won this client, when that person wasn't even actually in the room, right? And we try to do it differently, but it takes also a change of work culture to an extent, because people are so trained and used to hierarchy and these things. So we're trying to do it. I always say, like, I have this ambition to do it really, really better, like 100% better. Even if we just land on 20, 30% better, we're going to be way better than the others.
Yeah.
That's the idea.
That makes sense, and I think when you have that high bar, that's when you have that opportunity to reach that bar to stretch. It's like stretch goals. You have those stretch goals, and that
Totally.
allows you to go a lot farther than you could be.
Totally.
And I really love that part about having those amazing people in place and being able to kind of understand and celebrate them, because I think so many times, like you said, like we forget about that human aspect. If somebody does really great work, but there's like these silos within an organization where you only know about that great work with the team that you're on or the manager that's there, then that doesn't really tap into that, because you feel like a rock star and you want everybody else to know that you did awesome things. So I love that you're creating, that opportunity for that to happen. But I also thought, like you said so well, from creating the solution standpoint, where those really like I read this book called Range that talked a lot around having those different experiences, tapping into other people's and other organizations' superpowers is really how you solve the problems of tomorrow, because we can't kind of solve these problems with a focused thinking of just one thing, or the silo thinking. You have to have that integration. You have to have the awareness and the tap into other people's superpowers, because that's going to help solve the problems of tomorrow in having those different perspectives. So it sounds like that's a lot of what you're talking about as well too, in
Correct.
being able to kind of help serve your clients.
Correct. The biggest problem, I think, with the human brain is that we care about certain things a lot and we care about a lot of things not at all, right? The closer it is to us, the more we care about it. It's typical human behavior, the further it's away physically, the less we care about it. So even if you have access to knowledge, if you are not a specialist, you're probably not going to consider making that part of the strategy you build. So, and that is one of the biggest problems I see with remote work. And I'm a fan of remote because it gives a lot of flexibility. But the biggest problem is if the person who is extremely knowledgeable is 5 calls away instead of your table neighbor, right? That knowledge is probably not going to be part of the solution you're trying to create. And that's something we all have to overcome, right? And we are trying to do that. Just this was microcosm. Now I'm going into macrocosm. We have that in organizations as well, as you described it. Organizations are siloed for a reason. Why? The more you silo them, the more you give individual targets from a P&L perspective, probably the more profit you're going to squeeze out of these organizations. Once you start thinking across, at larger organizations, you fall into the trap of people thinking, they're going to handle this. Like, I don't need to make money because they're going to make money and then everything is going to be great. So that's why large organizations fall into this trap of micro siloing things and micromanaging things. And that's how large organizations are run, right? But we are not a large organization. We don't need to run it that way. We have the luxury that we can say we're going to run it differently and we're going to run it more integrated and think about how do we create solutions, even if one part of the brain is far away from the other part of the brain.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. And I imagine that's probably part of like the secret sauce for yourself and the organization, or a combination of both. The ability to kind of create that DNA, that culture, that experience for people that are on the team, and your clients as well too. And knowing that, you're tapping into, this superpower, that superpower in order to come up with those solutions. I imagine that's probably is part of like your secret sauce.
Correct. We're trying. But again, nothing is perfect, as I always said. And I talk a lot about my ambition of where I would like the company to be. But we are in an infant state, right? The company is 2 years old. We make a lot of mistakes. We learn from our mistakes. But that's part of entrepreneurship as well. I always tell people, like, please don't get angry if something doesn't work out the way we anticipated it. But we're going to pivot. We're going to change. We're going to learn. As long as we don't ignore mistakes and as long as we don't ignore certain things that don't work, and learn from them, we're going to do it better next time around, right? But that's exactly the ambition that we just talked about, and how you and I described it. That with integration, from my perspective, is not about efficiencies and squeezing out the last dollar. It's all about creating a better result, because that better result is going to give you more loyalty from your customers, your talent. Ultimately, that's going to build a business with longevity.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. And especially too about not lowering the mission. Sometimes we have to adjust and change and pivot and do things like that, but it's not lowering the bar, as you said so
Not at
well.
all.
Yeah, absolutely love that. So I wanted to switch gears a little bit, and I want to
Mhm.
ask you for what I call a CEO hack. So this could be like an app, a book, or a habit that you have, but what's something that makes you more effective and efficient?
Well, I'm actually super inefficient.
Okay.
I'm always very honest and blunt. I'm very inefficient because I strongly believe that nobody's good at everything. I'm really good at some things, but I'm really terrible at a lot of other things that I don't care about. I mentioned this before in the conversation, where things you care about, you're very close to, you're really good at, you're really a specialist, and then other things that are in your head somewhere further away, physically or mentally, you're just not going to be good at. So my CEO hack, of course, it doesn't work when you're a one-man show or a small business, right? Because you have to do everything. But at a certain scale, getting people who are much better in the things that the business needs than I could ever be. The worst is if I try to, for example, put together an Excel sheet. Just forget it. There's people out there who are so much faster, better, more efficient, and this is just a bad example. But I believe everybody has skills, everybody has superpowers, and everybody can learn more skills. That's fine. But if you want to build at scale fast, you're going to have to trust other people and hire people who are much better at certain things than you could ever be, and accept that, right? That's kind of my hack. Like, I always tell my team, listen, right now you're wasting your time because I know what you're really good at, and you're trying to do something that you shouldn't be doing. So find someone who's better at it and then give that person the responsibility.
Yeah, and like you hear said over and over again, time's your most valuable resource. And I think when use that word superpower earlier, you're talking about the organizations that you're acquiring and things like that, but also we individually have our superpowers as well too. And the more time you take
That's right.
away from that, the more you're doing a disservice to yourself, your clients. It just goes on and on and on that list. So I love that part, because I think once you start to tap into everybody's quote unquote superpower, spend as much time as you can there, then that's going to again allow the organization as a whole to flourish.
Yeah. Yeah. That's exactly the point. Spend your time on what you're really good at. Um, or if you really feel you want to learn something else and level up, then focus on that. Focus on leveling up, but don't try to do everything. Like, there's people who really, really love doing desk research. They just love it. It really gives them a lot of happiness. It doesn't give me happiness, right? So, so I rather have someone who does that really well than me trying to figure it out.
Yeah, absolutely. That doesn't sound like my sign of happiness as well. So I'm there with you like on that, Tim. So what would you consider to be what I call a CEO nugget? A little bit more word of wisdom or piece of advice. You might have already touched on this, but it's something you might tell somebody that's completely starting in business, getting started in building that. Or if you were to hop into a time machine, you might tell your younger business self.
Well, it's always very philosophical, right? Because I have really seen a lot. Um, Building 5 businesses in the last 26 years, having invested in probably 60 businesses directly and probably hundreds indirectly. There's not Number one learning is there's not one path to success. There's a million different paths to success, and very often, if something doesn't work, it has nothing to do with you. It has to do with the million variables that have to come together in the right moment in time that going to make your business, your product, that one meeting successful. I don't have a general hack, but to believe in yourself and keep standing up every morning and trying. And everybody who says it's gonna be easy, it's a total liar from my perspective. Because and people don't talk about these things, right? Like when I started my first business was 21, that sounds amazing, right? We were probably $1 million revenue after 3 years, but nobody talks about that we didn't pay ourselves for 2 years, but paid our employees, right, to get there. So, and I had to work a side job. I had another job where I was working in the nights to make sure that employees going to get paid. So that stuff is often being left out in these entrepreneurial success stories in general, right? So people work really hard to build things, and whoever is not ready to work really hard is probably not going to be super successful or has to be super lucky.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, or both, at that because that sacrificial part is huge, as you said. You being able to kind of work that job, to be able to kind of help pay for employees. You don't hear those stories. You see the success, you see the finish line, but you don't see all the other things. And I think that
Right,
sacrificial part, where we're talking about hard work, or we're talking about even kind of taking the step back. Sometimes when you make those decisions, it ends up becoming a really great part of what leads to success, but it doesn't often get mentioned as much. So I appreciate you sharing
right,
that.
right. And I remember very vivid. And again, like entrepreneurship is probably the best job in the world because you decide on your own desire of freedom and the level of hard work you put in. But in my few years that I've been doing this, the more work you put in, usually the better the outcome is going to be, right? And the more you do something you really care about. I'm not talking about loving something because I think entrepreneurs probably love out of 30 days, they love the product, the company 2 days, and the rest 28 days they struggle with like fixing stuff. But as long as there is um, um, there is not a love but a desire for something, um, then I think investing time is, as an entrepreneur, is always better from my perspective than signing up for a job you're not happy in, right? But it takes diligence, it takes sacrifice. It's not easy, and a lot of people have tried. But also, I think what's also important is to understand, and a lot of like the last years were dominated by venture capital being throwing money after people, right? And now we obviously have the opposite situation. I think another important learning was I've seen a lot of people who build very big businesses but didn't own anything of it anymore in the end. And that
Mhm.
is because impatience, greed. Um, I think it's way smarter to build a little slower organically than building with other people's money because then your freedom goes away. Right? And I'm not saying that because that's the only way to succeed. With Meet the People, we also have external capital to do the acquisitions. Nevertheless, we do feel that this is our company and we run it the way we think we should run it, right? But again, these are all learnings. I sound like an old man with a lot of wisdom here, but I think when people think about setting up a business, the reality is hard work is going to probably bring you closer to success. Doing something you really care about, you don't need to love it, but you need to care about it. And then trying to do it without external capital as long as possible is also usually resulting in more happiness in the end.
Yeah, that makes so much sense because I think a lot of times when you think about your why you started, why you're doing it, why you're sacrificing, why you're investing, all those things, we can sometimes can lose kind of sight of that, or kind of lose maybe even control of that, especially when you are getting the outside capital, or if you don't really care about something enough. When you realize how much you have to roll up your sleeves, how much you have to sacrifice, you realize that you really, really don't want to do this. And I think when you do care about something, you start to realize that you may have those 2 days that you only like it, but you know that it's worth it and you're willing to put that in. So that's where that care kind of ends up being that that little bit of gas in your tank to keep you going on that next day, because you need that whenever you're doing something as difficult as it is.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I agree 100%.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. So, I wanted to ask you now my absolute favorite question, which is the definition of what it means to be a CEO. We're hoping to have different quote unquote CEOs on the show. So, Tim, what does being a CEO mean to you?
It means you are the spirit of the company. You're the one person that should always show up, because you're carrying the torch, right? And I talked about superpowers and how it's important to recognize what you're really good at. But in the end, if toilet paper runs out, yeah, I'm gonna go to the deli and get toilet paper. That's how it works. So you are everyone's everyone's assistant while everybody's assisting you, and you're not on a pedal stone. In the end, everybody looks at you for guidance, but in reality, probably 90% of the time, you don't even know what you're doing, right? So being a CEO for me has always been very confusing, because people love to look up to you and like, oh my God, he must have figured it out, or she must have totally figured it out. And I always say like, well, honestly, I don't know how the company is going to look like in the next 3 months. Or I'm not, I mean, financially, but like it can be that we decide to launch a new product in 2 weeks that we don't know about today. So as a CEO, you're always, what the definition is, you're always thinking, you never stop caring, and you always have that pressure that people are gonna look to you for a solution, even though you might not have one.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. So often I hear that, and I believe I've heard, during interviews that, you should get more attached to the why than the how. Cause so many times we get so attached to the how, it has to be this way, we have to do this, that it ends up kind of locking you in. But you have to have that ability to pivot. And you pivot because of your why, because you care so much, because you know that you want to see this mission happen, that you're not so locked into the how it
Yeah.
happens. You're locked more into the why it needs to happen.
Yeah. Very often people come to me and ask like, so what am I going to do here? Right. So what's my job? Like, can you describe exactly what I'm going to do? And it's like, honestly, I don't know. I really don't know. Like maybe I shouldn't say that, but I've hired a lot of people in my life where I didn't exactly knew what I'm hiring them for, but I knew there were great people who I think are going to be really beneficial to building the vision and the company I want to build. And so far, touch wood, it has worked. And I and that means, what does that mean? I'm less stressed about, as you describe it, the house. Like how does it going to be? How does it going to look? Like I don't really care so much about that, but I know why I'm doing it, because I want to do something that is better than what I've experienced before. And I believe there is a space in the market for this to exist. And that drives me. So I think that probably describes it.
Yeah, absolutely. Being mission driven is such a huge thing, and understanding that because things change so rapidly anyways, that even if you know the how at that time, it could change in the next minute. So you never know
That's
where
right.
things gonna end up being.
That's right. And we are beholden to so many things we can't control as
Hmm.
humans, anyways, as people in society, right? I mean, we have experienced this in the last 4 years.
Hmm.
Pandemic, economical crisis, like we can't control any of that stuff
Right.
if we're honest about it. So the how is more like, how do I deal with the situation, rather than, how do I execute something in 10 years? I don't care. But
Yeah.
why am I doing it? And adjusting the business against, why am I building it, and what is the learning of the last week that's going to change how we're going to do things? That's really what drives me, I would say. And you described it really well. Thank you for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you're doing the hard work. I just get to say the word. So there you go. You made it easy for me. So, Tim, truly appreciate that definition. Of course, I appreciate your time even more. So, what I wanted to do now is pass you the mic, so to speak, just to see if there's anything additional that you can let our readers and listeners know. And of course, how best people can get hold of you, find out about all the awesome things you and your team are working on.
Of course, cool. I mean, we work on a lot of things all the time. So I think the best way to finish a podcast like this is, if you want to reach me, you can reach me on LinkedIn, but you can also email me on tim@meetthepeople.com. I'm always open to listen to, like interesting ideas. I'm always listening to new business ideas or business principles, but also obviously when talent is looking to change careers we are also around if clients are looking to, as I mentioned in the podcast as well, if you're looking to grow your business and you don't really know where to start, we're here as well. That's what I want to give the audience today. Reach out and connect, and let's build something.
Absolutely. I love that. You started out building and you're continuing to build, and how important and necessary that is, that we can always quote unquote build a better mousetrap, make things a lot better. So of course, to make it even easier, we'll have the links and information in the show notes as
Cool.
well too, so that everybody can follow up with you. But Tim, again, appreciate all the awesome things you're doing, the work that you do as well. And I hope you have a phenomenal rest of the day.
Thank you so much. Thanks for your time.